So, you're on placement and you have an array of emotions and feelings, lots of things going on in your mind right now. You may be excited about starting a new placement or your first placement area. You might be anxious about what this placement may hold for you. There may even be something about this placement that makes you feel quite sick when you think about it or really excites you. So I wanted to help you with a kind of template to really make sure that you're able to kick this placement off to the best start. What is it that you can do to really make sure that you get the best out of placements right now? Well, as you know, my goal here is to ultimately help all learners in practice get the most out of placement experiences and to make sure that they get the right support, even when things are good, but definitely when things are not going so well for you. Because it is actually during these most difficult times of learning that you can learn the most about the profession that you are in, but also about yourself. This is where we start to learn more about what makes us tick, what stresses us out, and how we react to those situations and how we react in them. Remembering that we are there for our patients. Knowing how you react under stress is really quite pivotal. But before we kick off, I want to just add this in as a reminder that when you are learning in practice, you are being assessed from the very moment you step into that clinical environment, that unit. And I say that as a reminder that we really do need to try to perform at our best, but really ensuring that we are able to go into placement areas to start off with the best possible beginning. So the first thing I would like to talk about is making friends. And I'm talking the professional type here. So along with having people to talk to, there are two teams that can be immensely helpful for you to not only settle into an environment, but also to continually develop whilst you're working there, and you will want to connect with these people at the earliest moment that you have. The first group is the ward clerks, the administrators, the receptionists. They'll be called different things in different areas, but ultimately these are the people that really make sure that the flow of patients is supported as best as it can be. They are key in making sure that units run smoothly. They help the admission and the discharge of patients, as well as kind of daily activities in terms of ward rounds for the medical teams and a multitude of other professional groups that come onto the ward area, the clinical area, to care for the patients that you are looking after. A key learning objective, in my opinion, should always include learning about the admission and the discharge of your patient group. This is because ultimately you will be doing that as a student, but also you will be responsible for that as a practitioner. So, by making friends with the very people that hold the keys to cabinets that may have paper documents in them, or be able to show you how to log on to computers, how to navigate through EPR, the electronic patient record systems, the process in which to admit a patient or discharge a patient to and from that environment, you get the gist. They are incredibly important when it comes to learning the flow of patients through that area. So if you can make friends with them, they're going to help you immensely understand that more, mainly because they're the ones that don't have a clinical workload. So they may have a little bit more time to spend with you to go into more depth around that process of admitting and or discharging your patients. I think in every single placement and every ward area that I have worked in after qualifying, one of the first things I did was to connect with those administrators, those receptionists, those ward clerks, because they're the ones with the connections with the consultants, the doctors, the medical teams, the dietitians, the psychologists, everybody that is involved within that holistic care for your patient. They have the connections too. They're the people that can help you contact through the switchboard the different departments that you may need. They may know the best times to even contact these people. They may even know the locations of their offices if you can't get through on the phone. So these are people that are really going to help unlock some of the barriers throughout your day. And if you don't make friends with them, or if you annoy them, they may not be willing to kind of help you that much. But if they're able to help you achieve those objectives of admitting or discharging patients or setting up an appointment for a patient that is going home, there are endless scenarios where they can help you. That ultimately helps them, because then they are able to work more efficiently in order to make sure that flow of patients is smooth. And the other team member to really connect with early on is the domestic team, the housekeepers, the cleaners. Again, they'll have many different titles, I'm sure, but this is not only the team that is responsible for keeping the clinical environment, the ward area clean and safe, obviously again as a learning objective from an infection control prevention perspective. That's really important that you connect and understand their role in that clinical area, but they also help to ensure that stock is replenished, so anything like needles, syringes, dressing packs, most often than not everything that you will be using in that environment as a clinician, they will either know where to to go and find that piece of equipment, or they'll also be able to replace that piece of equipment. If you no longer have any in that area, they will know where to get the stock from. So if you again have an admission or a discharge, that clinical area is going to need to be cleaned. Now obviously we have different levels of cleaning in the NHS, so if it's a standard clean, that could well be down to the domestics in that clinical area to do a standard clean of that environment. So if you are in an area that has quite a lot of patients being admitted and discharged, then you may need to speak to these people quite a lot. You're going to want to make sure that that relationship starts off on the right foot. As well, if I, as a nurse, was working with you and I asked you to go and get some ampules of saline, and you don't know what that is or where that is, you're going to want to go and find help. You go out of the environment that you're in and you don't see anybody around. There's no other students, there's no healthcare assistants, there's no other nurses around. So you go and have a look and you come across either the domestic or the housekeeper and you say, please, can you help me? I'm looking for some ampules of saline. And they go, oh yeah, follow me. They're in this room here. You can then very happily come back to me and give me what I'd requested. And I would be impressed. It's your second day and you knew where they were and you also knew what I asked for. Little do I know that actually you went out and used your initiative and found somebody else to help you, but now you know that that's an ampule of saline and it's stored in that location. You've already started to learn stuff. Now, the second thing I want to talk about, and the final thing I want to talk about, is observing to absorb. I think I've made that up myself. I don't know. I've never heard it before. Observing to absorb is basically standing and watching, but with the intent of learning. Now, we've all been there as learners and sometimes as nurses being asked to go and work in new areas, or any profession for that matter, asking them to work in a new area that they have no idea what's expected of them. We spend a bit of time kind of just standing and looking around and wondering what on earth we should do. But there is also times where you can stand and look around and just start to look a little disinterested and a bit bored, which is really not what we want to be doing as learners in environments. The last thing you want to be doing is looking bored. So there are a couple of things that I'm going to talk about through this that I'd like you to keep in your mind when you are observing to absorb. It is perfectly acceptable to spend time watching, because let's face it, watching often is how most of us learn, watching to do something for the first time. So we would expect you to spend time standing, watching, learning. But I also have worked with students who find it more useful to maybe sit behind the nurse's station instead of stand at the bedside watching things being done. If you are finding yourself in a time where you are, the curse word, bored, and you're sat behind a nurse's station or you're sat somewhere and there's nobody else around you, go and have a look and see what they're up to and just say, would you mind if I stand and watch you do that? I wouldn't mind you saying that, and most people wouldn't mind you saying that either. The first really important thing to remember is to make sure that it's clear to others that that's what you're doing. You can do this in two ways. The first way is to verbalise. Would you mind if I come and watch you do that? You can verbalise your intent for standing and observing. You can also visually show it by having your notepad out and making notes. So you can simply say, would it be okay if I observe you doing that procedure, or if I hear you having that conversation, or if I watch you using that piece of equipment, so I can start to learn what it is that I need to be doing throughout the rest of my placement. Or if you have seen something and you have been watching and observing, but there are certain things that maybe happened or that was said that you didn't really understand, go back to that person and say, when I was observing you doing X, or when I was listening to you have that conversation, I heard you say this, or I watched you do that. Why was it that you said that at that point? Or why was it that you decided to use that piece of equipment over this piece? It's just another way to demonstrate that you have been watching and learning. But also that follow-up conversation of anything that you don't understand is really important as well in learning, because you don't want to learn something the wrong way, or you don't want to not have the underpinning rationale behind the decisions that you will be making later on in your placement. You can also observe to absorb without verbalizing that's what you're doing, but at all times, whether you verbalized it or not, this is very important when it comes to observing. And yes, I'm talking to you. You know who you are. You have what's called a resting face. We all have those faces sometimes when we're really concentrating on something, that we do something peculiar, and we know that our face can give us away before we've even spoken half the time. But you really don't want it to say things that you're not actually thinking or feeling. So if you are one of those people that may have a resting disinterested face, then maybe have that conversation with the teams that you're working in. Just a heads up, guys, I've been previously told that when I'm really concentrating on something or when I'm thinking, sometimes my face might do this. So it just kind of gives people an insight into you rather than them filling the gaps in when they're looking at your face, saying something completely different to what you just said of, I'm just standing watching to learn. The ability to build insight into how and who you are as a person in times of stress or extreme concentration. Self-awareness is huge. So if you don't yet know what your face or your body does when you are in uncomfortable situations, in nervous situations, and you start to smirk, because you're not meant to be laughing, but you start to develop this thing where you get nervous laughter. It's a real thing. Lots of other situations are real too, but building self-awareness into your own mishappenings will really save you from looking sad or annoyed, angry, whatever it is that your face does. It's one of the biggest things, and if you know about it, then you can start to tap into a bit of self-awareness and a bit of insight into your own self when you're in those learning environments. Now, not only is this activity of observing to absorb the foundation of learning, it's also a really good tool in learning how to plan out your day in that area. So by standing and watching can tell you an awful lot about how the team members in the team that you're in plan out their day. So as a nurse, more often than not, this is kind of how I would plan my day. My shifts always start with a handover, usually the big ward handover and then a bedside handover from the nurse that I'm taking over from. I would then go and meet all of my patients face to face. Before I do anything else, obviously, if there's no phone calls to take or urgent matters at hand, I will go and introduce myself to my patients. I do this for two reasons. The first one being, they know my face, they know my name. If they need something, then they can come out and call me before I'm due to go back into that cubicle or that environment to see my patient next. The second reason is to do a quick once over of what the baseline of that patient is. So if my colleague had said they seem to be working a little bit harder at the moment, we've gone to the bedside together to view that, I'm going to still want to go in on my own and observe it. We spend a lot of time with our patients, so if they are starting to veer off their path of what is normal for that patient, we will witness it with our eyes often before we will spot it on any kind of observational assessment. So having that baseline of what that patient looks like when you're taking over is really key. Then once I have done that, I am likely to pick up already some tasks for those patients. They may need some extra bed sheets, towels, or they may already be in pain and they need medication straight away. There'll be a list of things that I start to prioritise for my patients as I'm going through. Then I would usually go through their documentation, their medication charts, their observation assessments, their risk assessment forms, any kind of assessment for that patient, pain, fluid readings, all of that kind of jazz, and start to plan out what my day might look like in terms of medication, feeds, assessments, and anything that is potentially planned for that patient on that shift. Going to x-ray, being discharged, you get the gist. Again, this process is likely to flag a medication that may be delayed or may be imminently due, so I have that as my first priority. I then go through and see what I can start to cluster care, and in fact I may do a whole video on cluster cares, but it's in effect being able to group together different duties, cares, medications, all of those kind of things, and seeing where you can group things together so you're only interrupting the patient once as opposed to maybe 6 or 7 times as an example. But there are so many benefits to the patient and obviously the staff member from being able to get everything done once rather than multiple times, from infection control, well-being, the list goes on. So maybe I'll do a full video on that potentially. And then my day flows from there, and there will be many curveballs throughout the shift. So being able to observe different people, not just the person that you're working with, supervisors, assessors, working with all of the different team members with their own patient workloads and observing how they plan out their day, how they interact with their patients, you will pick up bags and bags of handy hints and tips of how you can best plan your day, and also building up a little bit of rationale as to why you may want to do something before something else. Paracetamol might be due at 12, but you know physiotherapy is coming at 11. Last paracetamol was given at 5, so you could probably bring that an hour early. 20 minutes before the physio's coming, you can give pain relief depending on what the physio is about to do to that patient. It's thinking through all of these different things, and as a learner, they're very subtle and you won't pick them up until you go to do that in the future and your assessor says you've not thought about this, and you think, damn, I hadn't spotted that. And it's often in these types of situations, just by observing to absorb, you are going to start to be able to notice why and what people that you are working with do to care the best for their patients. And for the love of goodness, get a notebook. Get something to jot all this down. Let's keep our brain engaged for learning rather than clogged up with having to remember everything right here, right now. Write it all down through the power of reflection. We've talked about that before. You are going to start to pin those pieces together so you can learn from those observations. And there we have it, some fundamentals for you to just keep in your mind when it comes to starting new placement areas. Your placements are really short, so if you're able to kick it off the best possible way by making those connections and starting to learn how to plan out your day through observing to absorb, the time will fly, and before you know it, you'll already be finishing the placement, and hopefully you would have freed up a lot of time for you to start practicing some of the skills and developing the all-important knowledge to underpin what it is that you're doing in your role in practice. So as always, stay safe and take care.